Okay, in this short video we are going to look at the three layers of the heart wall. The first being the endocardium, or the innermost being the endocardium, the outermost being the pericardium, and the one that's sandwiched in the middle, which we are perhaps more familiar with, the myocardium. And let's put that on there straight away. And let's give those cells some nuclei, why not? So this is a little sample of myocardial tissue. This is what we also refer to as cardiac muscle tissue. This is the tissue responsible for the pumping action of the heart, and obviously is a major driver of blood around the vascular system. The myocardium comprises about 95% of the wall thickness. Depending, obviously that varies, but depending on where the wall, what region you're assessing it, on average. So in this lovely 3D software, which I really do like, it's very good, but the thickness of the endocardium and pericardium is very much exaggerated so that you can see them, but just know that in reality they would be much, much thinner. The myocardium is made up of cardiomyocytes, which we see here. These are the cells of cardiac muscle tissue, and they are striated. There's these little dashes that we see here they're there to represent proteins inside the cell, which from an anatomical point of view makes them very similar to skeletal muscle tissue, but they are under autonomic control. So we have no conscious control over our heartbeat. We can do things to increase our heartbeat and decrease it, and go for a run or meditate, whatever, do some yoga or jump up and down will affect our heart rate, but we can't consciously decide how the heart rate changes, and I for one am thrilled about that. Imagine having to worry about that. Anyway, the innermost layer, as we said before, is the endocardium. Again, wouldn't be that thick, but there we go, never mind. The endocardium is primarily made up of a layer of connective tissue between the myocardium. It's the inside layer, or the innermost layer as we say, of the vessel. So on the left hand side here would be where there would be blood in this, let's say, ventricle. Software doesn't do a brilliant job of this tissue, or this example of endocardial tissue, would be made up of individual endothelial cells in the endocardium. Endocardium, how many times can you say that in a row? So it's not just this flat sheet of tissue, it's endothelial tissue. And it's there for much the reason I imagine you think it's there. It's there to reduce friction. You've got red blood cells bumping along the wall of the the innermost wall of the ventricles and the atria, and the endocardium is comprised of cells which are much smoother compared to the myocardium, and therefore allow those cells to move over them with reduced friction, so you're not going to create any inflammatory response. I should put out the endocardium covers the entirety of the inside of the heart. It even covers the valves of the heart. So it is there to protect that entire everything from having excessive friction, basically. Right, let's rearrange our image. In fact, let's pause. So the outermost layer of the heart is called the pericardium, and I know what you're thinking, you've just added two layers on there, how is that possible? Well, if if I can just get this snip that I took earlier from a textbook. The reason there are 2 layers there in the pericardium is because of this. Imagine your heart was being dipped into the pericardium and it wraps around it, basically creating a cavity in between until the point we get to here, this pericardial cavity. So what we see here is the serous pericardium, and it too has an inner and outer layer. Let's get rid of that. So this is the serous pericardium. We would call this the visceral layer of the serous pericardium, or the parietal layer of the serous pericardium. Confusingly, and just to make life that much harder, the visceral layer of the serous pericardium is sometimes just referred to as the epicardium, which is a nightmare for anatomists everywhere, but there we go. What can you do? So this thin membrane which wraps around the myocardium, the innermost layer, the visceral pericardium, will contain blood vessels, lymphatics, so lymph vessels, and so on. But we have this cavity, as you can clearly see, in between the 2 layers. And I think, oh no, wrong one. There we go. And we fill this cavity, as I've done, with pericardial fluid. And that reduces friction for the outermost layer of the pericardium. We are not done, which is known as the fibrous pericardium. I know, it's all of this. So from to the right side of the myocardium is considered 1 layer. I don't make the rules. So serous pericardium, visceral layer of the serous pericardium, parietal layer of the serous pericardium, and I think we've got a little tag, there you go, fibrous pericardium. The fibrous pericardium is made of much, or comprised I should say, of much thicker, denser connective tissue. So the role of the fibrous pericardium is to keep the heart in place and make sure it doesn't move around, basically. So your heart lies in a region of your thorax known as the mediastinum, and this is basically from the sternum, your sternum bone on the front of your chest, to the vertebral column at the back, and from the first rib, which you should be able to feel just under your clavicle, all the way down to the diaphragm, which you aren't going to be able to get a hold of, and it is between the lungs. So it's the region between the lungs from the sternum to the vertebral column, from the first rib all the way down to the diaphragm. And we want our heart to stay in that position, and the purpose of the fibrous pericardium is to achieve that role. It is to keep the heart fixed, and the fibrous pericardium is connective tissue that basically attaches to the diaphragm among other structures and keeps the heart in a fixed position. So when viewing the heart, it 2/3 of it, if you were to draw a line down the middle of your body and separating left from right, the left hand side would contain about 2/3 of your heart. The right hand side would contain the other third, roughly. And the heart rests almost, well, it doesn't rest, it's not the right word to use, but it's sitting on top of, while still contracting, the diaphragm. And basically the role of the fibrous pericardium, which we see here, is to prevent overstretch of the heart. It prevents it from overstretching. But the fibrous pericardium is very dense, rough connective tissue. So this thinner layer of pericardial tissue is necessary to reduce friction between the fibrous pericardium and the myocardium. If we were to have the fibrous pericardium attached directly to the myocardium, then as the heart moved, i.e. twisted as it contracted and relaxed during systole and diastole, it just wouldn't work. There isn't enough give in the fibrous pericardium for that to happen. So an additional layer is necessary, filled with fluid, pericardial fluid, or pericardial cavity fluid, in order to create a smooth surface that the heart can contract and relax over. So this whole section here is one layer of tissue. I don't understand it either, but that is the case. So that is the pericardium. And there we go.